It was supposed to be an ordinary Saturday morning in Crestwood Pines, the kind of meticulously landscaped suburban neighborhood where nothing more dramatic than a lawnmower running too early ever happened. Families were heading out to soccer practice, retirees were trimming hedges, and joggers traced their usual paths under the shade of oak trees. The air smelled faintly of fresh mulch and blooming roses. But beneath that calm surface, tensions had been simmering for months. The Homeowners Association had recently formed what it called a Community Protection Unit, a small team of self-appointed enforcers dressed in tactical vests, radios clipped to their shoulders, and patches that looked far too close to real police insignia. The guards carried themselves like officers, but they were nothing of the sort. At first, residents chuckled at the absurdity of it all. But when the guards started issuing fines, threatening letters, and warnings with military-like authority, the laughter quickly faded. Among those skeptical of this new force was Commander Rachel Hayes of the FBI. Hayes had spent over 20 years in federal service, running operations from Miami to D.C., earning a reputation for being composed under fire and unshakable in the face of intimidation. To her, authority wasn't about uniforms or loud voices. It was about integrity, restraint, and knowing when to stand tall. But the men running the HOA's unit didn't know who she was. That Saturday, Rachel pulled into her driveway after a week-long trip. She stepped out of her SUV in a plain gray t-shirt and jeans, carrying nothing more intimidating than a grocery bag. But she didn't even make it to her front door before a deep voice cut through the morning air. "Ma'am! Stop right there!" Standing at the end of her driveway was Officer Dale Rourke, the self-declared chief of the Community Protection Unit. Mid-40s, shaved head, mirrored sunglasses, and a tactical vest 2 sizes too small, he looked every bit the part of someone desperate to be taken seriously. His hand rested near the holster on his hip, where a handgun glinted in the sun. Rachel froze, her instincts kicking in. She'd faced down drug lords, arms traffickers, and corrupt politicians. But there was something uniquely unsettling about a suburban HOA guard with a badge he bought online and a weapon he barely seemed trained to carry. "What seems to be the problem?" she asked calmly, her voice steady but firm. Rourke took a step forward, puffing out his chest. "You're in violation of community ordinances. That boat parked in your driveway. Not allowed. I need you to move it immediately, or face detention." Rachel blinked. The boat in question wasn't hers, it belonged to her neighbor, who had parked it temporarily while fixing a flat tire on his trailer. But more importantly, this man had just threatened detention, as if his HOA vest gave him the legal right to put her in handcuffs. And then his hand moved closer to the gun. For the first time, neighbors began to notice. Curtains shifted. Phones rose. A jogger stopped mid-stride, staring at the scene unfolding. The quiet of the block turned to a collective hush, as if everyone knew they were about to witness something far larger than a dispute about a boat. Rachel Hayes, veteran FBI commander, stood face to face with a man who thought intimidation equaled authority. And he had no idea who he was dealing with. The silence on the block was deafening. Children who had been riding bikes slowed to a halt. A couple across the street whispered to each other, one clutching their phone like a lifeline. The HOA's so-called Community Protection Unit had pulled its boldest stunt yet, and they'd chosen the wrong driveway. Rachel Hayes didn't flinch. Her training demanded composure. In the FBI, the smallest crack in your resolve could be the opening an opponent needed. She shifted the grocery bag in her hand, her eyes fixed on Rourke's mirrored shades. She could see her own reflection, calm, unreadable. "Sir," she said evenly, "you don't have the authority to detain anyone. You know that, right?" Rourke smirked. "Ma'am, I'm the chief security officer here. You either comply, or I'll have to escalate this situation." And then, with theatrical slowness, he unfastened the strap on his holster. Gasps rippled through the gathering crowd. A teenager held his phone higher, zooming in. A mother yanked her son back onto the porch, whispering urgently for him to stay behind her. Rachel's instincts screamed at her to move, to react, to draw, but she wasn't carrying her service weapon. She was off duty. And even if she had been armed, she knew pulling a gun on a man this reckless would turn the neighborhood into a battlefield. So she did the one thing she knew would disarm him more than any weapon ever could. She stood taller. "Put your hand down," she commanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Rourke froze for a fraction of a second. Something about the way she said it, the cadence, the authority, didn't sound like an ordinary homeowner. It sounded like someone used to giving orders in situations far more dangerous than a suburban ordnance dispute. But his pride burned hotter than his doubt. He pulled the gun free. The barrel glinted under the morning sun. Neighbors cried out. One man shouted, "Call 911!" Another yelled, "Are you insane?" Phones were everywhere now, recording every angle. Rourke's chest rose and fell, adrenaline and arrogance flooding his system. "Last chance," he barked, the gun wavering just slightly. "Move that boat, or I move you." Rachel's pulse slowed. To anyone else, this would feel like chaos. To her, it was another standoff, only this time, the opponent wasn't a cartel boss or a violent fugitive. It was a man drunk on power he never truly had. She raised her hands just enough to show she wasn't a threat, her voice calm but carrying enough steel to silence even the bystanders. "You're pointing a weapon at a federal officer," she said. The words sliced through the air like a blade. Confusion flashed across Rourke's face. A laugh escaped him, but it was hollow, nervous. "Yeah, right," he sneered. "You expect me to believe that?" Rachel locked eyes with him. "Try me." And in that moment, the dynamic shifted. The crowd, once murmuring, grew bolder. "She's FBI," someone whispered loudly. "I think she's telling the truth." The teenager recording muttered, "Oh man, this is going viral." Rourke's grip tightened on the gun, but his confidence faltered. Authority, real authority, was standing in front of him, not the kind stitched onto his vest. What happened next would decide not just his fate, but the credibility of the entire community protection unit. The neighborhood was no longer quiet. A half-dozen voices overlapped, some shouting for Rourke to put the gun away, others begging Rachel to get back into her car. But she didn't move. She didn't blink. Her stance was steady, her chin high, every ounce of her body language projecting the authority she had spent decades earning. In her world, hesitation cost lives. And now, this entire block was looking to her to keep them safe. "Listen to me," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You've crossed the line. Lower your weapon. Right now." Rourke's jaw clenched. Sweat rolled down his temple, and his hand trembled ever so slightly. Behind him, two other security guards had arrived, jogging up in their mismatched uniforms. They froze when they saw the gun leveled at Rachel, eyes darting between their self-proclaimed chief and the unshaken woman in front of him. "Chief?" one muttered nervously. "Maybe we should." "Shut up!" Rourke barked, waving his free hand without lowering the weapon. "I've got this under control." But he didn't. Everyone could see it. Rachel inhaled slowly. She knew how to defuse a standoff. She also knew how to survive one. And she knew, better than anyone, that a man this unstable, armed and cornered, could do something irreversible in a heartbeat. So she did what FBI training demanded. She took control of the narrative. "Dale Rourke," she said firmly, using his name for the first time. His sunglasses reflected the narrowing of her eyes. "You are pointing a firearm at an FBI commander. That's a federal offense. Drop the gun, or you'll spend the rest of your life behind bars." The name. The title. The tone. It landed like a hammer. The crowd gasped. A woman whispered, "She's FBI?" Phones zoomed in. One of the younger guards paled and stepped back, muttering, "Oh my God!" Rourke laughed again, but the sound cracked under the weight of his faltering bravado. "You're bluffing. You're..." Then the wail of sirens shattered his denial. Police cruisers roared down the street, Lights flashing red and blue, tires screeching as they pulled up. Officers spilled out with weapons drawn, shouting commands that left no room for negotiation. "Put it down! Hands in the air!" For the first time, Rourke's mask cracked. His gun wavered. His lips parted, desperate to find words that would justify what he'd done. But there were no words left. His neighbors were staring at him not as a protector, but as the dangerous fraud he had always been. Rachel didn't move until the officers swarmed him, kicking his weapon away and forcing him to the pavement. His protests rang hollow. "I was just doing my job. I was protecting the neighborhood." But no one listened. The phones caught it all. The moment Rourke was handcuffed and hauled upright, Rachel stepped forward, her badge finally flashing in the sunlight as she pulled it from her pocket. "My name is Commander Rachel Hayes," she said loudly, her voice carrying across the stunned crowd. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. This man just threatened a federal officer with a deadly weapon." Silence. Utter, complete silence. And then the block erupted, not with cheers, but with the raw sound of neighbors processing what they'd just witnessed. Relief, anger, disbelief, it poured out in murmurs and exclamations. Some shook their heads. Some cried. And some, for the first time, realized how fragile their sense of safety had been under the HOA's false authority. Rachel, calm and steady, watched as Rourke was pushed into the back of a cruiser. She knew this was bigger than one arrest. This was the moment a community would start asking hard questions. Who gives authority? Who abuses it? And how far will ordinary people go before they stand up to the illusion of power? As the cruisers pulled away, the teenager who had filmed everything whispered to his friend, "This is gonna blow up online. The whole world's gonna see." Rachel glanced once more at the neighbors watching her. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just gave a single nod, a signal that the danger had passed, but the lesson would remain. Because this wasn't just a neighborhood squabble. It was a reminder. Authority without accountability isn't power. It's a weapon. And in Crestwood Pines, that weapon had finally backfired,